So in Tableau, hierarchies, groups, and sets can be a little confusing. They seem like they're kind of mutually overlapping and maybe not perfectly clear what does what. So I think it's worth having one video where we talk about all of these things together rather than separately, so we can point out the similarities and differences between them, kind of regardless of what order you watch the original videos in. So let's still keep working with our bookshop data, but let's dive in immediately to what's going on here. So a hierarchy is almost always used to provide the user the ability to increase or decrease the level of detail of the view on the fly. So for instance, if we were looking at the location of a publisher, that really is hierarchical from country to state to city. And what I mean by allowing the user to adjust the level of detail on the fly, imagine we're looking at, and we'll drag location up to columns, and we're looking at marking spend, which we're going to drag to our rows. By just changing, like interacting with the hierarchy, we can split things down by country, by state, by city. And remember, this example is not great in the sense that there's not a whole lot of hierarchy in our hierarchy, but in many examples, this would be exploiting out the view quite a bit more and allowing users to interact with different levels of detail as they see fit for a particular, application at a particular time. Notice, though, that the hierarchy is a hierarchy of columns. So whereas groups and sets that we'll see in a moment are all dealing with values within one column, typically speaking, hierarchies are hierarchies of multiple columns. So this is really one of the big differentiators. So one of the other pieces we have here are groups. So let's talk about the country of residence of the author, all the way at the top in the author field, and let's create a group. So notice that groups have to be mutually exclusive, meaning no item can belong to more than one group. That is not possible. Whereas with sets, as we'll see in a moment, sets can be overlapping. There's no problem having sets that have a non-empty intersection. Whereas with groups, you're taking the values in a column and you're splitting them into pieces, and that's it. There's nothing else you can do. So for instance, if we made this region, we could have Brazil and South America. We could have Canada and US and North America. We can have China, Hong Kong, New Zealand and Singapore and Asia. We could have Germany, Netherlands, Norway, the United Kingdom and Europe. And we could have South Africa and Africa. So notice that even as I was doing this, I could have stopped at any point, because no matter where I would have been in that process, all of my groups were mutually exclusive. No country in this column fell into more than two of these groups. More than one of these groups. None of them fell into two groups. So the point being now, if I'm plotting the oh my goodness, what do we want to do? If we want to do hours written per day and have this be our rows, and we want to break this down by region, for instance, and color, we can actually now see how, and it's a silly question, how the total number of hours that people spend per day is broken down by region in this data set. Obviously not a super interesting question, but the point is that typically groups are used to reduce the level of view temporarily, right? So the data underneath is still at the country of residence level, but we're using this group to highlight through color, typically through color, something like this, to highlight a particular level of detail just temporarily. So we want to break things down by the region for a while rather than the country of residence, just because. The country of residence is still there. It's not like we've fundamentally changed our data frame. It's that we've grouped these things together so as to decrease the level of view, to make it coarser for the time being. Sets are very similar. So sets are very similar to groups, except, in fact, let's just do it on the same thing here. So on country of residence again, let's do a set instead. And for sets, I can do two things. One, we saw that we can create a set based on conditions. So like we could have our set be the top 10, let's say top 10 sales. The top 10 countries with top sales. So the 10 countries with top sales, or you can make it 5 countries or whatever. So you can make sets based on conditions. You can also just make sets by clicking on them, and I want to show you what I mean there. So we'll call it set 1, and we have set 1. And now I can also make set 2, And I can also make set 2. And when I'm making set 2, I don't have to worry about whether I'm checking the same ones again. These sets can absolutely have overlap. There's no problem in that. Tableau does not care. Whereas with groups, you cannot have overlap. That's just not the way. It's just not the way it works. So whereas groups really are meant to reduce the level of view to make it coarser, to make it less fine. Sets might be used more towards highlighting certain data points in certain contexts. It's not like you have to completely reduce the view. You could just highlight a few data points here, highlight a few data points here, like the top 10 earners or the top 10 sales. Whereas grouping it down to the top 10 earners and everyone else may not be what you want to do. You may just, in a particular visualization or a particular dashboard, want to highlight those features. So just as a big recap, hierarchies are all about hierarchies of columns. It has to deal with multiple columns. Both sets and groups deal with single columns. Groups have mutually exclusive groups so that no record lies in two groups, whereas sets can have overlap, no problem. Groups are mostly used for reducing the level of view, so making the level of view coarser or less detailed, whereas sets are mostly used for calling attention to just some collection of data points in a particular context. So that hopefully puts everything in one big picture. I mean, obviously there's more to learn about each one of these, and that's what the individual videos are for, but this big one is just meant to kind of pull all of this together so that we know the pros and cons of each type.